I take a social historical approach to connect history to student learning. So framing literacy within a historical context supports an understanding of how culture, identity, history, and power help to shape practice, right? So we're not just doing a cognitive lens focused on skills, which has largely governed our education system for so long. We focus on skills, we take assessments. So a socio-historical approach looks at these intersections of culture, identity, history, and power to understand how can we improve what's going on in our classrooms. And so when we look at classroom spaces now, they're often ahistorical. If we look at practices now with black males, they don't really account for this rich literary past of who they are. And so this helps to sort of start to think about how to reconnect them to the past and help to reorient literacy. And so I often say that we don't have struggling students, right? We have struggling instruction. We have struggling curricula. We have struggling systems. I want to make a little bit of this interactive because we have quite a great amount of time with each other. So if you can kind of just turn to people at your table or the person next to you, and I want you to think about how are black males currently being educated now when it comes to literacy instruction. You can think of like reading, writing, English language arts. And then what are some problems of practice that you're seeing? So just take like a couple minutes and maybe introduce yourself to your neighbor and talk through one or two of these questions. We want them to be confident in using language. In research, they talk about literature being the vehicle to travel to other lands to build their intellect. And so this was written in 1837. It says that reading was the means to converse with the wise, to view everything elegant, to ascend to remote regions, and enkindle the most sublime emotions that can animate the human soul. Isn't that beautiful? It really is. I mean, are we placing texts in front of our young black males that enkindle the most sublime emotions that can animate the human soul? Maybe that's my only gauge next week. I have to put a piece of text that will do that, that has the potential to do that. And look, if some of the coach books and other things, the curriculum that they're telling me to teach will do that, fine. But if there's some emptiness in those kind of programs or curriculum, I'm going to find the text and I'm going to defend the text. So that if administrators or other teachers say, well, what are you teaching this for? You can't teach. Let me tell you why. Because we have to defend our instruction. Certain literary societies like the Banneker Literary Institute, they were known for being a training ground to train them in the gift of eloquence. And so often each member was required to deliver an original lecture, essay, or poem before the organization. It was really preparing them to be kind of public intellectuals. All of these goals that I'm describing, I'm always reminded of my doc program. And so it was almost like preparing them intellectually as if they were going through a doctoral program. And that's how we should be preparing our youth as well. And so literary character meant to being really proficient in skills, but it also meant that you were independently able to use literacy to project your voice through different literary pursuits. And so reading, writing, and speaking became a part of their personalities. And so we can all think if we have literary character, is reading, writing, speaking, thinking a part of who we are? Does it make up our culture? Part of our culture, our personalities. That's a goal that we should have, of course, for students forward in that. And so literary societies really stem from benevolent societies, moral societies. They had their own kind of movement before literary societies started. So these organizations really that were built around religion and the church were really sort of established the groundwork for establishing literary societies. And I think those established the groundwork for establishing other kind of fraternal societies like our historically black fraternities and sororities. And so, yeah, the church was very much embedded and a part of it. A lot of times they had their meetings at church. In different spaces that way, and some of the debates were about religion. But yeah, that's where they started. They didn't really separate their literary character from their moral and religious character. Harlan Hodge has known me since my very first year teaching, so it's a great supporter. We were both of each other. We have such a rich history, and if you have time while you're in Jackson, you really need, I brought some pamphlets because I visited yesterday or the day before yesterday, the International Museum of Muslim Cultures, and so they have an exhibit called The Legacy of Timbuktu, Wonders of the Written Word. And so we had this rich literary history before we were forced to come here. And so this takes it back even more. And so one way I thought, man, this was the history of what some of the things I'm doing, but even before this time. And it's such a great exhibit of some original writings and all these things that we're thinking about. This literary presence was really established before we were forced here. And so we continued this kind of work because I write with my girls. I do sort of a literary society with black girls. And I write with my girls, and when I read their stuff, I'm like, oh, I'm so envious. I wish I had written that. Like, you can't tell who is the PhD and who's the 16-year-old from our poetry or our writing alone. It's the great equalizer. And so using text for a vehicle of thought. When you select text, and you know, the adults I work with, I say, out of all the texts in the world, why did you choose that? And it's not to say that that's a bad piece of text, but we have to know why we're putting things in front of students to read. And so even if we just look at the 4 different ways they conceptualize literacy as our gauge for text selection, think about what that would do for our students. So we say, I'm selecting a piece of text that will help 4 different goals of literacy. 1, as a result of reading this text, my students will become smarter about something. It will build their intellectual development. 2, as a result of reading this text, it will help them to make sense of who they are. Not just their race or ethnicity or gender, which are some things we stick on when we think about diversity, but maybe it will help make sense of their personal characteristics, their individual self, their community self, their kinship self, thinking about themselves in terms of family and friendships. And then the third one is going to help my students build skills and knowledge. They're going to be a more fluent reader as a result of reading this text. And then fourth, it's going to again push them to be toward agency, independence, and confidence, and understanding the material in ways where they can develop their own either stance, perspective, or thoughts. And so identity meaning making was central to all literacy learning. And so, you know, I don't know how many times I talk to young folks and they don't have opportunities in school to make sense of who they are. I had a 17-year-old girl, or she was 16 at the time, and straight A student. She was probably going to the top Ivy League schools in the country, beautiful writer. And she wrote in her journal, when I found out we were going to be talking about identity, I cried last night because I don't know who I am, and not knowing who you are is the worst feeling in the world. And, you know, I had some pushback, and they said, we don't have to worry about her because she's excelling academically. But again, what is the purpose of literacy? Is it just so that they pass tests and get into the best schools? Or is it because they know who they are? Literacy affords them that vehicle. But she said, no reproduction. And so I'm mad at my black brother, but I'm dependent on him too. And she writes about how the need of this dependency to build and nurture our black families. So I'm like, we have to bring the boys and the girls together because they're writing about each other in very profound ways. So this young sister author wrote, and this is what we would call a back pocket piece that we kind of keep in our back pockets. I hear you. I am my sister's keeper. I hear you, speaking truth to lies and bringing light unto darkness. Your voice reaches beyond what I can physically hear, and it permeates my soul. It keeps me. I find strength in the syllables that flow from your mouth and comfort in the silences between. My success can only be attributed to your words of wisdom that carry me. Continue to keep me, my sister. Continue to carry me, my friend. Continue to love me, my companion, because I see you, I feel you, I breathe you, I am you. We are one, joined together in an unbreakable bond. Though you travel far, I am still with you. Though we may become estranged, we are connected, undeniably. That's writing to put forth an agenda of kinship and sisterhood. They just wrote it in one setting. And so when you nurture a space that creates this kind of thought, you would get these types of writings. Although I only showed you a very, very small handful of archives, black men, young black men have documented this for us. We don't have to search for it. It's written right here. All we have to do is read it, reflect, look back, and take it into our spaces today and act upon it, right? That's it for now.